If you close your eyes and listen carefully, you might still hear it. The murmur of the Bosporus, the clinking of ships in the harbor, the echo of prayer drifting from 1,000 domes. For over 1,000 years, this sound belonged to one city, Constantinople, the beating, glittering, maddening heart of an empire that refused to die. It wasn't supposed to last that long, of course. Empires aren't meant to. But Byzantium didn't get that memo. It began, as so many great things do, in the shadow of another empire's collapse. The Roman Empire, that colossal marble skeleton sprawled across Europe, was groaning under its own weight. Barbarians were pounding at the gates. The economy was in shambles. The politics were a soap opera of betrayal and bad haircuts. And the gods themselves seemed to have gone silent. Enter Constantine the Great, a man with enough ego to rename a city after himself and enough ambition to drag Rome's center of gravity eastward. Around the year 330 CE, Constantine looked at a modest Greek town called Byzantium, perched strategically on the edge of Europe and Asia, and decided, yes, this will do nicely. He built a city worthy of Rome's ghost. Massive walls, grand forums, aqueducts, palaces. But it wasn't just an imitation, it was a reinvention. This wasn't the old pagan Rome of marble temples and wolf legends. This was Christian Rome, baptized in ambition and bathed in gold. When Constantinople was dedicated, it shimmered with possibility. The empire's elite moved east, dragging their fortunes, their servants, and their grudges with them. The Latin tongue still echoed in its halls, but Greek whispers grew louder by the day. The city was where two worlds kissed, the ancient and the medieval, the Roman and the Greek, the West and the East. And as the Western Empire fell, piece by piece, century by century, Constantinople watched from its glittering throne and thought, well, that's not my problem. Rome burned, but Constantinople endured. In those early centuries, the empire still called itself Roman. To its citizens, they were Romaioi, Romans through and through. The rest of the world, though, would soon give them another name, Byzantines, a name born of convenience, and later of distance, because the West, as it crawled out of its own dark age, didn't quite know what to make of this shining Eastern cousin. Was it Rome reborn, or something alien? A Christian empire wrapped in Greek philosophy and imperial arrogance, simultaneously familiar and foreign. The Byzantines didn't care much what others called them. They had their own world, vast libraries, elegant diplomacy, and enough palace intrigue to make HBO blush. Their capital gleamed, the Queen of Cities, they called it. A place where silk from China, furs from Russia, and spices from India all met in a kaleidoscope of color and sound. But beneath that splendor, the foundation trembled. The empire had enemies on every horizon. Persians to the east, Goths and Vandals to the west, endless tribes shifting and seething like waves on its borders. And internally, well, politics in Byzantium made Roman Senate squabbles look like polite dinner conversation. Generals turned emperors, eunuchs ran the court, and the clergy often held more sway than the throne itself. Still, the city stood. Its walls, triple layers of stone and ingenuity, mocked every army that dared approach, and for centuries they would hold.
Constantinople was not merely a city, it was a performance. Every church, every mosaic, every imperial procession was designed to remind the people that this was the center of the universe. Even God, it seemed, had chosen this city as his earthly stage. The Hagia Sophia rose like a vision from another world, its dome floating impossibly above the city, lit by hundreds of flickering candles. When it was consecrated in 537 under Emperor Justinian, even the emperor himself stood in awe, whispering, "Solomon, I have outdone thee." Because, of course, he did. Ah, Justinian. If there's a man who embodied the Byzantine spirit, brilliant, ruthless, overambitious, it was him. He dreamed of reuniting the Roman Empire, of bringing back the glory days when Roman legions marched from Britannia to Syria. And for a while, he almost did it. His general, Belisarius, a stoic genius with the patience of a saint, reconquered North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain. Rome, the original Rome, was briefly Roman again. Justinian's empire stretched across the Mediterranean like a resurrected ghost. But dreams come with a price. Wars drained the treasury, plague ravaged the population, and the very lands he conquered slipped away almost as soon as they were taken. When the dust settled, Justinian's empire had glory, but little else. And yet, his mark endured. The Hagia Sophia, the codified Roman laws that would influence Europe for centuries, and the strange shimmering idea that Byzantium was not a successor, but the true continuation of Rome itself. Centuries turned like slow tides. New emperors rose and fell, icons were painted, kissed, and then for a time smashed, as the empire tore itself apart in theological debates that often spilled into riots. Was the image of Christ divine or blasphemous? Could a painting carry holiness, or was it idolatry wrapped in gold leaf? For a civilization that had faced Persian invasions, Arab conquests, and natural disasters, it was somehow this question that brought it closest to implosion. Because, of course it was. And yet through all of it, through civil wars, sieges, earthquakes, and plagues, Constantinople still shone. Byzantium was like a candle that refused to be blown out, its flame flickering, guttering, but never dying. As the centuries passed, the empire transformed. Its language became Greek, its face solidified into Orthodox Christianity, its neighbors grew stranger and more dangerous. But from the city's great walls, one could still look out across the Bosporus and see the same waters Constantine had chosen so long ago. The same straits that connected two continents, and perhaps, in some poetic way, two worlds. By the dawn of the 7th century, the Byzantines stood as the last heirs of the ancient world. While the West sank into feudalism and darkness, they preserved the knowledge, the art, and the bureaucracy of Rome. They were the keepers of continuity, sometimes reluctantly, often arrogantly. But storm clouds gathered again. A new power was rising in the deserts to the south, fierce, devout, unstoppable. The world was about to change once more, and Byzantium, proud and glittering as ever, would be the first to feel the tremor.
It's the 7th century. The empire still calls itself Roman, though few Romans would recognize it now. The Latin tongue has almost vanished, replaced by the flowing syllables of Greek. The emperors no longer ruled from the marble hills of the Tiber, but from the glittering shores of the Bosporus. And their world is about to catch fire. For centuries, the Byzantines had fought a cold, grinding war with their ancient nemesis, the Sassanid Persians. Two great civilizations locked in an endless dance of victory and revenge, taking turns sacking each other's cities like it was a shared hobby. By the early 600s, both empires were exhausted, hollowed out by decades of conflict. And then came Emperor Heraclius. Heraclius was not born for an easy reign. He inherited a near-bankrupt empire, enemies on every side, rebellions in his provinces, and a Persian army camped uncomfortably close to his front door. But he had something few Byzantine emperors possessed: stubborn,
defiant energy. In one of history's great reversals, Heraclius gathered what strength remained, marched east, and struck at the heart of Persia. His campaign was brutal, desperate, and somehow, against all logic, victorious. By 628, he had defeated the Persians, reclaimed the true cross from Jerusalem, and stood as the savior of the Christian world. For a brief, glorious moment, Byzantium stood triumphant. And then, almost immediately, everything fell apart. Because just as the Persians collapsed, a new power rose from the Arabian deserts, fierce, united, and burning with faith. The early Muslim armies swept across the Middle East like wildfire. They were fast, disciplined, and, most terrifying to the Byzantines, utterly convinced that God was on their side. Within a few years, Syria was gone, then Palestine, then Egypt, the empire's breadbasket for nearly 7 centuries. To lose Egypt was not just a territorial blow, it was existential. The empire's grain supply vanished, its trade networks shattered, and its prestige crumbled. Heraclius, the hero who had saved the empire from Persia, now watched helplessly as the sands of the south swallowed his victories whole. He withdrew to Constantinople, old, bitter, and disillusioned, muttering, according to legend, "Farewell, Syria." It wasn't just land the Byzantines lost, it was the illusion of eternity. The 7th century was a test of survival. Wave after wave of Arab armies pushed north, first into Anatolia, then toward the very gates of Constantinople itself. In 674, the city faced its first Arab siege. The world held its breath. For 5 long years, the Byzantines clung to their walls. But they had a secret weapon. A weapon so terrifying it bordered on myth: Greek fire. It wasn't ordinary fire. It burned on water. It clung to ships and men alike, devouring them in liquid flame. Even the sea could not extinguish it. The formula was a secret state, known only to a few: sulfur, quicklime, naphtha, perhaps even magic, if you asked the sailors who saw it. With this infernal weapon, Byzantine ships turned the tides, setting the Arab fleets ablaze on the dark waters of the Bosporus. The siege broke. The city survived, and for a time, so did the empire.
But the Byzantines were never good at peace. When the danger receded, they turned inward, as they so often did, and began fighting themselves. The next great crisis wasn't military, but spiritual. It was a war not of armies, but of icons. The iconoclast controversy tore the empire apart in the 8th and 9th centuries, a theological civil war over whether images of Christ, the Virgin, and the saints were holy or heretical. It began, as most religious disasters do, with an emperor who decided he understood God's will better than everyone else. Emperor Leo III, a capable soldier but not much of a theologian, looked at the empire's misfortunes and concluded, clearly God is angry about all these paintings. So in 726, he banned religious images. Mosaics were smashed, icons burned, monasteries raided. The people rioted, the monks resisted, and the empire, which had just survived the might of the caliphate, now turned its fury upon itself. Because of course it did. The irony, of course, was that while the Byzantines were busy arguing over whether one could kiss an icon, the Muslim world was thriving, scientifically, culturally, and spiritually. Baghdad rose as a center of knowledge,
Scholars preserved and expanded upon Greek philosophy, while Byzantium looked increasingly like an old man yelling at his own reflection. Still, and this is the strange beauty of Byzantium, somehow, miraculously, it endured. Even at its weakest, the empire remained a fortress of bureaucracy, faith, and sheer obstinacy. Its themes, the new system of provincial administration born from the chaos, gave it structure. Its soldiers, settled farmers defending their own land, became the backbone of a leaner, more resilient state. The Byzantines had learned the hardest lesson of empire: how to survive when greatness is no longer an option. By the 9th century, after a century of chaos and self-immolation, the winds shifted again. The iconoclasts were defeated. The images returned. Churches once again glittered with gold mosaics, and the empire, though smaller, seemed to breathe again. Trade revived, culture flourished, and Constantinople, ever immortal, resumed its role as the envy of the world. From the grand palace, emperors could look out over the city's harbors and see hundreds of ships from every corner of the known world. The markets overflowed with silk, spices, and perfumes. The Hagia Sophia once again blazed with candlelight, its dome a glowing reminder that faith and empire, for now, were reconciled. The Byzantines had faced annihilation and survived. But survival had a price. They were no longer Rome's conquerors. They were its memory. A ghost still walking, still proud, still convinced that the world revolved around the Queen of Cities. And yet, in the shadows of its victory, new powers stirred. To the north, the Slavs and Bulgars grew stronger. To the west, Latin Christendom began to eye the east with both curiosity and disdain. And to the east, the Abbasid Caliphate watched with quiet patience. The empire had endured its first great death, but history, ever cruel, had plenty more to offer.
By the 9th century's end, the Byzantine Empire had survived so many near deaths that it was starting to look immortal. The empire that refused to die. And now, out of the ashes of wars, iconoclasm, and political chaos, something remarkable happened. It began to shine again. The empire entered what historians like to call its Macedonian Renaissance. Which, to be fair, sounds grand, and it was. But it was also exactly as Byzantine as you'd imagine, full of brilliance, betrayal, and bureaucracy so dense it could suffocate a philosopher. The story begins with Basil I, a man whose life could have been a novel, the kind of story you'd assume was made up if history weren't so ridiculous. Basil started as a peasant from the Balkans, maybe Armenian, maybe not. No one's entirely sure, and he certainly wasn't volunteering details. He arrived in Constantinople with nothing but his wits and an alarming amount of charm. Within a few years, he had charmed his way into the emperor's service, then into the emperor's bedchamber, quite literally as he ended up marrying the emperor's mistress, and then finally into the emperor's throne after a suspiciously convenient assassination. Because, of course he did. Under Basil and his descendants, the empire entered a golden age, or at least a very gilded one. The arts flourished. Scholars copied and preserved the works of Homer, Plato, and Aristotle. Byzantine diplomacy reached new heights, or new absurdities, depending on how you look at it, with envoys dazzling foreign courts with silks, jewels, and polite arrogance. The capital itself became a spectacle. Byzantium was no longer merely surviving, it was thriving. The streets of Constantinople bustled with life. Greek merchants haggling over spices, Venetian traders eyeing profit, monks debating theology over wine, and foreign ambassadors trying desperately not to offend anyone. The Palace of the Emperors, the Great Palace, was a world unto itself, filled with mosaics, golden thrones, and mechanical marvels that seemed like magic.
Bronze lions roared, golden birds sang, and the emperor's throne could rise into the air just to remind visiting dignitaries that yes, they were standing before the chosen ruler of this civilized world. Subtlety was never really their thing. And yet, beneath the pageantry, the Macedonian emperors were effective rulers. They reformed the military, strengthened the administration, and for a while brought real stability. The empire's borders expanded once again. Under Nicephorus Phocas and John Zimiscus, Byzantine armies marched deep into Syria and Armenia, reclaiming lands lost centuries earlier. The Arabs, which once were unstoppable, were now on the defensive. And in the west, the empire's influence stretched across the Balkans and into southern Italy. For the first time in generations, Constantinople felt secure. At least secure enough to start meddling in everyone else's business.
You see, Byzantium's greatest weapon was never its sword. It was its diplomacy, subtle, layered, and often diabolically clever. They could bribe, flatter, or marry their way out of nearly any disaster. Where Rome conquered by force, Byzantium conquered by invitation or infiltration. The empire maintained a vast network of spies and agents, whispering in every court from Baghdad to Venice. Foreign rulers received Byzantine titles, gifts, and the occasional veiled insult wrapped in silk. To be recognized by Constantinople was to be legitimate. To be ignored was an insult worse than war. This was soft power before anyone invented the term. And the Byzantines, they were masters of it. The greatest moment of this diplomatic theater came under Basil II, known, quite dramatically, as the Bulgar Slayer. Now, Basil wasn't much of a talker. He wasn't a philosopher or a lover of art. He was, quite simply, a soldier, and a very good one. When he came to power in the late 10th century, the empire was wealthy but fractious. Noble families were growing too powerful, rebellions flared constantly, and the empire's Balkan frontiers were under pressure from the Bulgarian kingdom, fierce warriors who had no intention of being civilized. Basil spent most of his reign crushing them. His campaigns were brutal, methodical, and merciless. In 1014, after a decisive victory, Basil ordered the blinding of 15,000 captured Bulgarians, leaving one man in every 100 with a single eye to lead the others home. When Tsar Samuel of Bulgaria saw his maimed soldiers return, legend says he died of shock. Hence the title Bulgar Slayer, a name both impressive and deeply unsettling depending on your perspective.
Yet, for all his iron and blood, Basil II brought stability. By the time of his death in 1025, the Byzantine Empire stretched from southern Italy to the Caucasus. Its economy flourished, its culture glittered, and its capital was the envy of the world. This was Byzantium at its peak, rich, confident, and impossibly complex. The Hagia Sophia stood as radiant as ever. Silk and gold flowed through the markets. The streets were alive with languages from across the known world, and the empire's scholars, poets, and theologians filled libraries with words that would outlive even the walls of their city. If you were to visit Constantinople then, at the height of its golden age, you might have thought it eternal. The city seemed untouched by time, a place where the ancient world still breathed through marble and incense. But as any historian will tell you, golden ages are rarely as solid as they seem. Because while Basil II was out there conquering, he forgot one small detail: succession. He never married. He left no heirs. And when he died, his empire fell into the hands of distant relatives who were, to put it kindly, not Basil. The aristocrats he had spent a lifetime suppressing came rushing back with a vengeance. The empire's wealth, once carefully managed, began to be siphoned off into private hands. Lavish ceremonies multiplied, discipline crumbled. The generals who once guarded the borders now schemed for the throne. And while Constantinople was busy congratulating itself on its divine destiny, the world outside was changing.
To the north, a new people were rising. The Rus, fierce traders and warriors from the rivers of what we now call Russia and Ukraine.
They had raided Constantinople in the past, but now they came bearing gifts, and more importantly, interest in religion. In 988, Grand Prince Vladimir of Kiev sent envoys to study the great faiths of the world: Islam, Judaism, Western Christianity, and finally, Eastern Orthodoxy. When his emissaries saw the Hagia Sophia in all its candlelit splendor, they returned to him speechless. "We knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth," they said. And just like that, Orthodoxy spread northward, binding the Slavic world to Byzantium in faith and culture. It was one of the empire's greatest legacies, and one of its cleverest diplomatic victories. But diplomacy couldn't stop the tide forever. By the mid-11th century, the empire was tired again, decadent, complacent, and strangely fragile beneath all the gold. Its armies, once the best in the world, were now underfunded and undermanned. Its generals were ambitious but disloyal. And its emperors, well, they were more interested in court intrigue than strategy. A storm was coming, and this time it would not be from the desert or the steppes, but from the mountains of Anatolia, where a new and fearsome enemy was rising. A people who rode like the wind, fought like ghosts, and carried a new faith across the world like wildfire. The Seljuk Turks were coming, and Byzantium, for all its gold and glory, was not ready.
Empires rarely die suddenly. They fade, quietly, painfully, like a candle burning to its wick. By the mid-11th century, Byzantium was still the richest state in the Christian world. Its mosaics still glittered, its scholars still debated, and its bureaucrats still produced enough paperwork to smother a horse. But behind the gold, the cracks had begun to show. And then one day, the empire simply tripped over its own arrogance and fell. It happened in 1071, in a lonely plain in eastern Anatolia called Manzikert. The emperor at the time was Romanos IV Diogenes, a capable man, brave in battle, but not exactly the most politically secure. His court was a nest of vipers, his generals jealous and scheming, and his army a patchwork of mercenaries who were more interested in coin than loyalty. Facing him were the Seljuk Turks, led by Alp Arslan, whose name translated meant heroic lion. That's usually not a great sign when you're on the other side. The battle was a disaster. The Byzantine army collapsed, the emperor was captured, and when he was finally released, his rivals in Constantinople decided to reward his bravery by blinding him. Because of course they did.
The defeat at Manzikert was more than a military loss. It was an unmaking. Anatolia, the empire's heartland, its breadbasket, its recruiting ground, fell into chaos. Turkish tribes poured across the plains, carving out principalities that would one day become the backbone of the Ottoman Empire. And Constantinople froze. The court turned inward, squabbling over who was to blame, while the empire's borders crumbled. It was like watching a proud old ship spring 1,000 leaks while the crew argued about the color of the sails. Desperate times call for desperate letters. In 1095, the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos looked west to the Latin kingdoms of Europe and decided it was time to make a very awkward phone call. He sent envoys to Pope Urban II, asking for help against the Turks. Maybe a few knights, some mercenaries, a bit of muscle to reclaim lost lands. What he got instead was the First Crusade. Europe's answer to his plea was essentially, sure, we'll help, and also let's conquer the Holy Land while we're at it. Thousands of knights, peasants, and zealots poured east, shouting Dies Vult, which means God wills it, which, as history repeatedly proves, is one of the most dangerous phrases ever uttered.
At first, it almost worked. The Crusaders helped the Byzantines recover territory in Asia Minor, and in 1099, they captured Jerusalem itself. Alexios, ever the pragmatist, played a delicate game, offering supplies, demanding oaths, keeping the unruly Crusaders at arm's length. But the alliance was always uneasy. The Latins saw the Byzantines as decadent and untrustworthy. The Byzantines saw the Latins as uncouth barbarians with swords and body odor. They were, in short, doomed to hate each other. Over the next century, the empire limped along under the Komnenian emperors.
Alexios, John, and Manuel, who managed, through sheer willpower and charm, to hold things together. They rebuilt the army, mended the economy, and even dazzled Western visitors with the splendor of Constantinople. When Emperor Manuel I Komnenos entertained Western knights, he did so with such magnificence that even the proud crusaders admitted, albeit reluctantly, that the Byzantines might still have a touch of divinity left in them. But diplomacy could only delay what history had already decided. By the late 12th century, the Crusades had changed the balance of the world. Venice, Genoa, and the other Italian city-states dominated the seas. The Seljuks fractured, only to be replaced by more dangerous rivals, and the Latin West, once a patchwork of kingdoms, was now rich, organized, and ambitious. The Byzantine Empire, meanwhile, was tired. Its bureaucracy bloated, its treasury strained, and its throne, as usual, was surrounded by daggers. Then came the Fourth Crusade, and with it, the death of Byzantium as it had once been. The Fourth Crusade was supposed to be simple: sail to Egypt, strike at the heart of Muslim power, reclaim the Holy Land. A noble plan. Except it was organized by men who couldn't balance a checkbook. When the Crusaders couldn't pay Venice for their ships, the Venetians made them an offer. Help us capture the Christian city of Zara, a rival port, and we'll forgive your debt. So naturally, the Crusaders agreed, because who cares about moral consistency when you're wearing chainmail and owe money to Venice? Zara fell, the Pope excommunicated everyone, and then, as if this whole saga weren't ridiculous enough, a Byzantine prince appeared, promising the Crusaders money, troops, and church unity if they helped him reclaim his throne. His name was Alexios Angelos, and tragically, the Crusaders said yes. In 1203, they sailed to Constantinople, not as enemies, not yet, but as helpers. The city, wary but curious, watched as these strange Latin knights camped outside its walls. But promises made in desperation are rarely kept. When the Byzantines realized the prince couldn't pay what he'd promised, tempers flared. Riots broke out. Fires spread. The Crusaders, hungry and humiliated, decided they'd had enough. In 1204, they stormed the greatest city in Christendom. For 3 days, Constantinople burned. Churches were looted, relics stolen, nuns violated, altars overturned. The Hagia Sophia, that eternal symbol of divine majesty, was desecrated. Its altar shattered, its icons defiled. Even hardened knights wept at the sight. But many did not weep at all. They melted down the city's treasures, carved up the empire like spoils of war, and crowned a Latin emperor in the ruins. The Byzantines, once the masters of Christendom, were now exiles in their own world. From 1204 onward, the empire was a ghost. The survivors fled to Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond, each claiming to be the true Byzantine, like shards of a shattered mirror, each reflecting a fraction of the glory that was lost. For nearly 60 years, the Constantinople remained under Latin rule, a hollow empire built on looted gold and broken promises. But even ghosts can be stubborn. In 1261, the Byzantines, under Michael VIII Palaeologus, retook their city. When his soldiers slipped through the gates and reclaimed the Queen of Cities, the people wept. Bells rang again in Hagia Sophia. For one fragile moment, it seemed the empire had risen from the dead. But it wasn't the same. The marble was cracked, the coffers were empty, and the soul of the empire, that strange mix of pride, faith, and destiny, was tired. The Byzantine Empire was back, yes, but it was no longer the empire of emperors. It was the empire of survivors.
By the 14th century, the Byzantine Empire was a ghost of its former self. Its emperors still wore crowns, its priests still sang in the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia, and its people still called themselves Romans. But the empire itself was no longer an empire. The fields of Anatolia were lost to the Turks. The Balkans had fractured into warring kingdoms. In Constantinople, once the beating heart of the world, was now a fading jewel surrounded by darkness, a city of scholars and beggars, of palaces crumbling beside ancient walls. The empire that had once ruled from Spain to Syria now ruled little more than a city and a dream. The new power in the world was the Ottoman Empire, young, hungry, and mercilessly efficient. From the ashes of the Seljuks had risen a dynasty of warrior sultans who called themselves Ghazis, holy fighters for the faith. They were not content with land. They wanted history itself. By the early 1400s, they had devoured nearly all of what remained of Byzantium. The empire survived only because the Ottomans had other wars to fight, and because its walls, the Theodosian walls, still stood like a defiant fist against the horizon. Massive stone bulwarks, 3 layers deep, stretching 4 miles across the landward side of the city. They had withstood every siege for 1,000 years, until now. Enter Mehmed II, the Ottoman Sultan who would one day be called Fatih, the Conqueror. He was young, just 21, but brilliant, calculating, and obsessed with one thing: Constantinople. To him, it wasn't just a city, it was destiny. He saw himself as the heir to Alexander, to Caesar, to the prophets of old. And he believed God had chosen him to do what no one else had done, to break the queen of cities. Across the water, in the shrinking Byzantine court, sat Constantine XI Palaiologos, the last emperor. A nobleman, brave, pious, and tragic, ruling a capital of perhaps 50,000 souls, guarded by fewer than 7,000 soldiers. 7,000 men to face an army of nearly 80,000 Ottomans. And yet Constantine refused to flee. He knew the end was coming, but he would not abandon the city, because in truth, he was the city. In April 1453, the siege began. The Ottoman cannons roared day and night, monstrous bronze guns forged by a Hungarian engineer named Orban, capable of hurling 600-pound stones across the fields. The walls shook. Church bells rang in mourning, and inside the city people prayed. Greeks, Italians, monks, mercenaries, all knowing that history itself was closing in.
The Byzantines fought with desperate courage. They patched the walls, repelled assaults, and even launched daring counterattacks under the cover of night. For weeks, they held out against impossible odds, but the end was inevitable. On the night of May 28, 1453, the emperor gathered his soldiers in the Hagia Sophia. He addressed them simply, not as an emperor to subjects, but as brothers, facing the end together. Then he took communion, confessed his sins, and rode out to the walls one last time. At dawn, the final assault began. Waves of Ottoman troops hurled themselves at the defenses. The cannons roared, smoke and dust filled the air. And then somewhere along the battered wall at the gate of St. Romanus, the line broke. The defenders faltered. The Ottomans surged in. Constantine was last seen in the melee, casting off his imperial regalia and shouting, "The city is fallen, but I am still the emperor." And then he was gone, swallowed by the tide of battle, his body never found. By midday, Constantinople had fallen. Ottoman banners flew from the towers, the streets ran with blood and fire, and the sound of 1,000 years ended in a single echoing silence. When Mehmed entered the city, he dismounted his horse and walked through the gates in awe. He gazed upon the ruins of Hagia Sophia, the shattered mosaics, the torn banners, and whispered, "What a city we have given to ruin." Then, according to legend, he stooped down, picked up a handful of dust, and let it fall from his fingers. That was the price of empire. But even in defeat, Byzantium did not die entirely. Its scholars fled west, carrying with them ancient manuscripts, forgotten knowledge, and the embers of Greek learning. Those embers would ignite the Renaissance, reshaping Europe forever. Its art, its architecture, its theology, all would echo through the centuries. Even its name, Constantinople, would live on in song, in longing, in maps drawn by men who refused to let it go. The Ottomans made it their capital,
renaming it Istanbul. The Hagia Sophia became a mosque, but the stones still whispered of emperors and mosaics, of saints and scholars, of an empire that once called itself a kernel. And perhaps in a way it was, for Byzantium was never just a place. It was an idea that civilization could be beautiful and sacred, that power could be gilded by faith, that knowledge and art could stand against the storm. Even as the city burned, that idea refused to die. A soft music swells, a single choir singing faintly in Greek. Eternal memory, they sang, for the emperor. Eternal memory for the fallen. And as the sun set over the Bosporus that day, the Queen of Cities finally slept. Not conquered, but transformed. Here ended the Roman Empire, and here began the modern world.